Imagine an X-Men movie featuring not one but two teams of mutants, honouring the characters you love and introducing mutants you've never heard of before. A movie that redefines what the X-Men mean for the modern day, and you can experience the story just like you were there on opening night in the very front row. I'm the Caped Clinician, and this is my full pitch for the MCU X-Men. This video can be enjoyed completely on its own, but if you want to see how I would reboot the whole MCU, I've got the first two parts available right now. That's in a playlist that I'm going to link at the end of this video. But without further ado, turn off your phones, no talking. The movie is about to begin. The movie begins with a young girl being chased by a monster. Now we don't get a full look at this monster, but it's safe to say that the girl is absolutely terrified. She runs into her childhood home and slams the door, thinking that she's safe, but the monster squeezes itself in through the windows. And we finally get a good look at what's been terrifying this young girl. It's a pink gelatinous blob, with its skeleton, nervous system and eyeballs poking out. It's hideous, and the girl is right to be terrified. But the monster doesn't attack her. Instead, it reaches for a photo on the windowsill and shows it to the girl. It's a photo of the young girl herself, but also side by side with a young boy, her brother, and they're smiling, having just baked a meal for their family. This pink glob isn't a monster, it's her brother, and his X gene has just been activated. The girl continues to scream, and the new mutant is chased out of the house, followed by the mayor of the town, shotgun in hand. The mutant is frightened for his life, and he's right to be. There's a mob building, and he doesn't know how he's going to escape. But just as all hope seems lost, a jet arrives from the sky, containing our X-Men team. Cyclops, Jean Grey, Beast, Angel, and Iceman step out, and they take this new mutant and take him into the jet. The mayor of the town stands, shotgun at the ready, and points it towards Cyclops. He says that monster needs to be put down, he's a threat to the entire country. And Cyclops steps forward. His visor flashes red, and he says he's not a monster, he's a mutant. Aboard the Blackbird, our mutant is shivering with fear, and Jean Grey takes the time to sit with him, and she asks him his name, and he just barely manages to regain his ability to speak. And he says his name is Herman, and Jean says, "It's okay, Herman, you're safe now," as they fly back to the X-Mansion for the very first time in the MCU. Now we're about to meet the rest of the X-Men, but before we do, I just want to spotlight this character, Glob, or Glob Herman from the comics. He looks completely different to any other mutant that I've seen in the comic books, and I really wanted to focus in on Glob, because most mutants we've seen in X-Men movies before just kind of look like normal people, except from maybe Beast and Nightcrawler. But Glob looks completely unacceptable to normal human society, and I want to explore that aspect of mutant life. Some mutants can never really have a normal life again, and that's because of their mutation. And we're really going to explore that in depth in this movie. We cut to the interior of the X-Mansion, where the young X-Men team are training in the Danger Room, being watched over by our legacy X-Men team, who we just met earlier on the Blackbird. And this young X-Men team introduces new mutants we've never seen before on the big screen. Armor, Gold Balls, Jitter, Death Dream, and now Glob. A fascinating new team of mutants, with all new problems and all new powers to make this the most exciting and visually unique X-Men movie ever. Armor is able to grant herself a psionic exoskeleton. Gold Balls is able to launch non-viable egg-shaped orbs. Jitter is able to learn any mutant ability for 1 minute if she concentrates hard enough, but I'm going to simplify her power set for this first movie and enable her to either speed up or slow down her foes' attacks. Death Dream is more complicated. He's allowed to choose between a state of life or death, and in his undead state he can choose necromancy and inspire great fear within his enemies. And Glob is our ever-lovable pink ball of jelly. As the X-Men team fight and train in the Danger Room, we cut to the legacy X-Men, who are reminiscing on their times in the Danger Room. This is a much older team of X-Men than we're used to before. They're really experienced with their powers, and they've been through a lot together as a team. And we cut back and forth between the young X-Men training and flashbacks of when our legacy X-Men started out for the very first time in their iconic yellow and black first-class suits. And Cyclops isn't really happy with how the new mutants are turning out. He says they're just not ready to face the battles that the X-Men have ahead of them, and he walks out, but not before being greeted by Professor X. This starts off a really interesting ideological conflict between Scott Summers, Professor X, and another character we're going to introduce later on in the movie. Professor X is telling Cyclops that he hopes he didn't hurt any of them. Cyclops says, "Hurt who?" And Professor X says, "Those people. The people of that town when you took Glob out of their town by force." Cyclops says, "We didn't take him by force, we saved him. Those people were going to gun him down, and if I broke a few noses on the way, I don't see any problem in that. But just to put your fears aside, Professor, no, I didn't hurt any of them." Professor X doesn't really understand why Cyclops doesn't see this as a big deal. The way Professor X sees it, he's an idealist. Every piece of harm that a mutant can inflict on a human sends their entire message back decades, but Cyclops doesn't see it that way. Mutants have been in the shadows for far too long, and if the mutants need to make a bold statement, then he's going to make a bold statement. Because even though the Professor X can say they're his X-Men, really, they're Cyclops's. Cyclops is the leader, and he calls the shots on the field. Jean walks in to break up this argument between the two of them, and Professor X says she's come in good time, because he has to leave for a press conference that's starting in an hour. We cut to this press conference, which is really a live televised debate being held by the Daily Bugle, with J. Jonah Jameson asking the questions. We have Professor Charles Xavier, a known mutant activist, against Nathaniel Essex III, owner of Essex Corporation, and a known anti-mutant activist. The big news is that Nathaniel Essex III has just signed a deal with the United States government, under General Thaddeus Ross, to start an anti-mutant task force. This organisation is tasked with locating and eradicating mutants from the American population. Nathaniel Essex sees mutants as a threat, and holding the second largest company in the world, only second to Oscorp, he sees it as his mission to wipe mutants out from the face of America. Professor X is opposing this, saying that with heroes like Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four in New York, why are mutants treated any differently? The X-Men have made big saves, like against Magneto's evil schemes in the past, and other mutants might not be heroes, but they just want to be left alone. There's no reason for this task force to exist, and it's an assault on the civil liberties of everybody in America, not just mutants. But here's where Nathaniel Essex plays Professor X against the live audience. He says that's exactly the problem. All of you mutants claim to be different to everybody else. You're asking for special treatment. But in this world today, there are so many people who are in wheelchairs like you, Charles. There are so many people who have disabilities and need treatment for them, and they're able to live normal lives. Why should the mutants deserve special treatment? You guys claim to be different to everybody else, but you're exactly the same. And that's why people hate you. Not because you're different, but because you constantly claim to be. The Professor X is taken aback by this. He just doesn't understand how anyone could have this point of view, and J. Jonah Jameson, seeing that Professor X is shocked, decides to instead turn the focus to the live audience, and a young mother talks to Professor X and pretty much echoes exactly what Nathaniel Essex just said. She says that her son has to wear glasses to school, and sure, sometimes he gets bullied for wearing glasses, but he still wakes up every day and goes to school without really complaining too much. How is this Scott Summers fellow, this Cyclops guy, any different to his son? Scott Summers just puts on a pair of red glasses and walks around like everybody else. He's just like her son, and yet he's constantly claiming to be different. You are constantly claiming that your X-Men are different when they're exactly the same. Clearly, this is not going very well for Professor X, and the X-Men know it back in the mansion. Our legacy team of X-Men are watching this on the big screen, and some of them are pretty furious, especially Cyclops. Cyclops hates this kind of idealism that Professor X has. He once respected it, but he realizes now that's not really how the world works. Jean Grey is more compassionate, and Beast doesn't really want to say anything against the Professor, and Cyclops again just storms off in a huff. So what am I trying to do here with this reinvention of the X-Men? Well, the classic mission statement for any mutant story is that they're fighting in a world that hates and fears them. And I've shown that the world fears them. We saw that in the beginning with Glob, but why do people hate the X-Men? We all know that the X-Men are meant to be an allegory for real-world prejudice, but the world's changed a lot since the X-Men were introduced. In a way, it's kind of similar to the Superman problem. Superman started off and he was a symbol of hope, but then the world became very cynical, and in a weird way, Superman became increasingly relevant. But the X-Men, everything's kind of gone the other way around. People have become more aware of prejudice in the real world, and that's only really a good thing. It's taught us to be more tolerant and kind to each other. But then the X-Men aren't really trailblazing that theme in the way that they used to. So now in this reinvention of the X-Men, they don't hate the mutants for just being different. They hate the mutants because they don't want to believe that the mutants are different at all. They deny any differences in mutant life. They cherry-pick examples to say that mutant life is just the same as human life. And there's a manufactured, artificial hatred towards the X-Men that Nathaniel Essex is not only fueling, but capitalizing on. And that's why he's our villain of this movie. So we've really hit at the ideological core of this movie. But now it's time for a huge action scene. Pro-mutant protests erupt at a school in Brooklyn, and the anti-mutant task force are deployed into the school to stop this protest from happening. And they burst into the school, weapons at the ready to disperse this protest at any means necessary. They're even hoping to be able to capture some mutants at the protest as well, just as a show of force. Now the young X-Men, some of them know people from this school, and they want to be able to help. Cyclops doesn't think they're ready, but Angel puts his hand on his shoulder and says, "Scott, Sometimes these young mutants just need an opportunity to spread their wings. So the young X-Men are sent onto the field, wearing those yellow and black first-class suits, trying to be heroes, just like the original X-Men, but it doesn't really go very well. Armor bursts into the scene, causing untold amounts of property damage and not really managing to do anything effective in the fight. Goldballs tries to shoot some orbs to incapacitate some of the soldiers, but they just end up hitting Glob instead, sending him flying through a wall and taking him out of the fight. And Goldballs is so nervous, he isn't really able to do anything else. Similarly, Jitter is just too nervous. She's trying to run all over the place and do some good, but she just isn't able to be effective on the field. And Deathdream, with his cynical, interesting supernatural powers, almost kills one of the officers of this anti-mutant task force. It's an absolute mess. The children are afraid, the teachers are angry, and the anti-mutant task force has exactly what they need to prove to the world that the mutants are evil. Now Cyclops and the rest of the team have been sitting in the Blackbird, cloaked from view, and Cyclops says his classic line,
"To me, my X-Men."
And the team arrive at the school, putting down the anti-mutant task force in a matter of seconds. And where the young X-Men failed, the legacy X-Men shine. They know each other, they synergize their powers together. I'm imagining some really unique power combinations, like for example, Jean using her psychic blasts to convince the soldiers that Beast is a feral animal, intent on killing them all, but really, he's just kind of a gentle giant. He wraps them up with a nice bow, says, "Oh my stars and garters," all those kinds of things. And Iceman and Angel combine the powers in a really interesting way. Angel flaps his wings and Iceman chills the air, which disables the anti-mutant task force's guns, and Cyclops, being the master tactician on the battlefield, uses everything at his disposal to ricochet his optic blasts around the field, knocking out the task force soldiers and using his blasts to move around, just like he did in X-Men 97. The Legacy X-Men tell the young X-Men to leave, but just then, Mr. Sinister, Nathaniel Essex III, bursts into the school. The young X-Men manage to get out, but Cyclops is left there to confront Mr. Sinister. And Nathaniel Essex is rubbing his hands together. Having seen this whole ordeal on the news, he made the trip straight away, and he's going to use this to really put the mutants in their place, at least as he sees it. He says to Cyclops that this public dressing down of the United States government cannot be tolerated, and it proves how all mutants are dangerous, and they need to be taken out. Cyclops responds, furious, but more to the point than Professor X. He says, "Dressing down? Your soldiers were ready to gun down these students with no authority. We're the ones who are protecting these students from you." But the headmaster cries out in anger, "You've ruined our school. What's going to happen to the education of these young people? These young minds are going to be scarred for life because of what you and your X-Men did." And Nathaniel Essex looks at Cyclops, smirking and saying, "These humans won't save you. I fought you during the World Wars, and I'm going to fight you now until my dying breath. Until there are no more of your whiny mutant scum left on this earth." And Scott leaves with the rest of the X-Men to return to the X-Mansion. At the school, Mr. Sinister remains to pick up the pieces. Parents flood in their droves, fearful for the safety of their children, but one of the children is revealed to be a mutant, and their parents are furious, blaming their own child for everything that's just happened. And in a moment of fury and panic, they give their own child up to Mr. Sinister, and Mr. Sinister promises the parents that he'll make sure that the mutant disease is cured, and he'll keep their child safe. But as the child is loaded into the back of Sinister's car, he's given a medication that knocks him out. Mr. Sinister has no good intentions, and we're going to see exactly what Mr. Sinister has planned for this young mutant. When they return to the X-Mansion, we finally start to see the cracks in Cyclops' armor. He's been stubborn, authoritative, and militant this whole movie, but he's really starting to show signs of self-doubt. He drops the rest of the X-Men off at the mansion, including the rest of the Legacy team and the Young team, but he puts the Blackbird into cloaked mode and flies off somewhere else. He tells Jean he's just visiting a friend, and Jean doesn't really know where he's going to be going, and she doesn't want to pry into his mind to find out. And while Cyclops is away, Jean, Beast, and the rest of the X-Men comfort the kids. Jitter says she's so nervous she doesn't know if she'll be able to do anything like that again. Glob is embarrassed, his first time back out in the public since being chased away by his own townsfolk, and he still just manages to mess everything up. And Deathdream, being an incredibly cynical and down-on-himself character, feels like he doesn't even want to live anymore. These young X-Men have just experienced their first loss in the public eye, and it's really broken something in them. This is when Beast invites these young X-Men to visit his lab. Jean and Beast have a plan to get these X-Men back up on their feet. But before that, we're going to have to see where Cyclops ended up going. But Cyclops is on a pretty long journey in the Blackbird, And as he's flying over to his destination, I'm going to take this opportunity to kindly ask you guys to consider subscribing and leaving a like on this video. I'm incredibly thankful for the support that you guys have shown on my MCU reboot Phase 1 and Phase 2, and this is a completely different kind of video that I hope you're enjoying so far. If you are, there's so much more to come, from a full pitch for Miles Morales' Spider-Man and other movies like a Moon Knight reboot, an Alpha Flight movie, and even DC fans. I'm still working on my DCU Flash pitch. To make sure you don't miss any of those videos, please consider subscribing, hitting the bell and leaving a like. And I've just been told Cyclops has arrived at his destination, so let's see who he's gone to visit. Cyclops has arrived at a small island, and as he enters a cave he comes face to face with Magneto. Now in this version of the X-Men have history with Magneto. As I mentioned earlier, the X-Men have made saves against Magneto's plans in the past, but after sustaining a severe and devastating psychic injury during his final battle against the X-Men, Magneto just doesn't really want to fight them anymore. Instead, he's retired to this life of solitude in this island, with occasional visits from Scott Summers' Cyclops. Magneto tells Scott that he knows what's been going on, and Scott says that he just doesn't know what to do. He feels like the X-Men aren't ready for the battle that he feels has already happened, and Professor X just doesn't understand. Magneto invites him to sit down and tells him a story of the World War. He says that when his family and his people were taken away, they were branded physically with ink, as though they were animals, and now it's not too different from how it was back then. People still brand mutants in their hearts and minds, but they're just not courageous enough to do it outright. They want plausible deniability, so they can wake up, look in the mirror, and say never again, so that they can performatively say that they love mutant rights, they love equality, but in reality, they're just as bad as everything was back then. Silence is acquiescence, and now the world's silence means acquiescence for Mr. Sinister. As this is going on, I imagine that Magneto is using some of his weakened psychic powers to show Scott Magneto visiting his parents' graves. And as an interesting visual point, I'd like for these kind of flashback psychic projections to take on some aspect of their wielder. So when Magneto projects something, we see the silver metal accents come through more strongly than other colours. It really feels like you're inside Magneto's mind. And we're going to contrast that by going back to our young X-Men, where we're inside the mind of Jean Grey. She's projecting a flashback to the young X-Men and the rest of our legacy team, of the X-Men after their first defeat. Clad in those classic yellows and blacks, everyone is brutally upset. Scott Summers especially. He feels like he let the whole team down, and it's the young X-Men's first chance of seeing Cyclops as more than just a leader. He's a person just like them, and he fails just like them. We see how Scott was more loyal to Professor X back then, and how clearly the years have hardened Scott and made him less receptive to Charles Xavier's words. And we see, at that time, the X-Men finally, for the first time, deciding to make their own suits. They don't want to just be a team under the boot of Professor X. They want to be their own people, their own mutants. They want to be free to live. We cut back to Cyclops talking to Magneto, and Magneto says, "Scott, don't be like Charles, and don't be like me. You have to be like you. The only way to solve the problems of today is with the minds of today. My time has long passed, but you're the leader of the mutants now, not Charles. You do things differently to the way that we could do it. You need to trust in yourself. You need to find the way to beat this your way." We cut back to the young X-Men, Jean and Beast. Jean's psychic projection has broken down, and she's telling the team, "Your first loss feels exactly the same as our first loss. Even though the problems you're facing are different, in a way, to what we faced, mutants have been facing the same problems for years, and we don't want you to be like us. You need to be like you." We're mirroring these two messages, Scott talking to Magneto, and his place as an ideological constant along the lines of Professor X and Magneto, but also the journey of the young X-Men coming into their own as their own team. Yes, it's one X-Men movie, but we have two X-Men teams, and finally, for the first time, they feel like they're on equal footing. And as the young X-Men start work on their suits, Cyclops leaves the island, but he asks Magneto one final question. He says, "Eric, when we used to fight, we barely had any time to talk, but I've always wondered something. How do you look so young? When you were a kid, way back during the war?" And Magneto says that it's to do with the iron in his blood. He's able to oxygenate his cells more effectively by controlling the metal in his blood, and that's what keeps him youthful. And it's then that Scott remembers something. Remember at the school, Mr. Sinister said, "I fought you during the war, and I'm fighting you now." Scott didn't really pay any attention to it, but he's realised maybe there's something meaningful there. He didn't say my family fought you during the war, he said I did. Maybe Nathaniel Essex is a mutant himself, and he's just using this to gain notoriety to boost his business above Oscorp. With that realisation in mind, Scott rushes back to the Blackbird to return to the X-Mansion and tell the team what he's figured out. They need to stop Sinister, and the only way to do it is to invade Essex Corp. Arriving back at the mansion, Cyclops has a quiet moment with Jean before returning to the rest of the team. Jean asks Cyclops, "Where did you go?" Cyclops just says he went to visit a friend, and the friend told him that he just had to be himself, but that's what he's afraid of. Without the visor and without the glasses, Scott is just a being of ultimate destructive power. He lets that power slip for 1 second, it could crack the planet in half. Being himself, unleashing that true version of himself without hiding it behind a facade, a mask or a veil, that frightens him to his core. And Jean says she understands that, and now the young X-Men team do too. Cyclops asks her what she's talking about, before we see the young X-Men team appear in their costumes for the very first time, and they look amazing. Their costumes look nothing like the other X-Men. They've clearly got more passion, more style, more design thrown into them. They look like a team fit for today, not a legacy team with more classic feeling suits. And Scott smiles, recognizing them for the first time as equals, not students, and together, they go to invade Essex Corp. Flying out in the Blackbird for the final time in the movie, the X-Men break into Essex Corp to discover the secrets of Sinister. Cyclops tells the team that their directive is to find out how Sinister has been keeping himself alive, to discover his mutant powers, but what they actually find is much more horrifying than they could have ever imagined. That young mutant from earlier, whose parents voluntarily gave them up, we see strapped up in a tube, and the mutant is unresponsive. Jean Grey can't detect anything with her psychic powers, and there's something being siphoned off from this mutant, blood and other tissue samples in some kind of grotesque ritual. What's worse is that Jitter finds another room, full of more mutants just like them. Deathstream is horrified, the rest of the young X-Men are traumatized, and Cyclops explores the facility further. Him and Angel discover that Mr. Sinister has been keeping himself alive for hundreds of years, using the bodies of young mutants. He synthesizes the DNA from different mutants to give him a regenerative healing factor, and to replace his dying cells with new ones, rebuilding himself every few generations in a continuous process to keep his empire alive. Mr. Sinister wasn't just spreading misinformation about mutants, he was using and exploiting mutants to get to where he is today. Mr. Sinister is the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing, someone masquerading themselves as a human, only on the side of other human beings like himself, but building his empire off the back of other mutants. Unless the X-Men stop him now, Essex Corp is going to become a bigger worldwide international threat. And that anti-mutant task force isn't going to be limited to the United States. It can spread across the entire planet. And just then, Mr. Sinister steps out to reveal himself to the X-Men in his full horrifying form. Wearing a garish uniform with a red diamond encrusted into his head, Mr. Sinister says that the X-Men have found out his secret, but they're not going to be able to stop him. Because even though the X-Men have a team, he only needs to rely on himself. And that's when it's revealed that this version of Mr. Sinister is just one clone of many, and the other clones of Sinister step out from the shadows, ready to take on the X-Men in a no-holds-barred battle for the future of mutant kind. The fight breaks out in epic fashion, with destruction so massive that it's reported across the news. The Daily Bugle and other news organisations are flying helicopters around the Essex Corp building, trying to understand what exactly is going on. And the young X-Men finally get their lick back. Glob and Goldballs finally team up. Instead of being hit by one of his orbs and being taken out of the fight, Glob absorbs the momentum and redirects it towards one of the clones of Mr. Sinister, incapacitating him. Jitter teams up with Angel, a combination of the old and the new X-Men together. Jitter manages to modify Angel's wings so that they produce a sonic burst, deafening the other clones of Mr. Sinister and leaving them vulnerable to other attacks. And finally, Cyclops teams up with Armor. Armor's ability is to produce a hard light shell, which can be used for offense and defense, but Cyclops realizes that he can use his optic blasts in a unique way to ricochet it across the room. So he shoots at a single point in Armor's barrier, ricocheting his optic blasts all across the room and defeating the rest of Sinister's clones. This is Cyclops as a master tactician, and it's the X-Men in their full glory. But the battle is loud, it's messy, and it causes so much damage that the people of New York just watch on in horror. But some people even run up to the Essex Corp building, hoping and praying that Nathaniel Essex is safe. After all, he's the person who's going to save them from the mutant plague. What would they do without him? Well, the X-Men are going to show the world exactly what they're going to have to do. After winning the battle, the X-Men drag Mr. Sinister out for the whole world to see, and Jean Grey and Deathstream combine their powers to make Mr. Sinister afraid, really afraid, for the first time in his life. Realizing that his empire is about to come crumbling down, Mr. Sinister sits there, a wrinkled, horrible clone, someone who's clearly an amalgamation of different parts of different mutants, screaming in terror, and the X-Men show him to the world. And Cyclops makes a speech to the news, a speech that's going to reverberate across the entire MCU and propel us into a new era of the mutants dominating the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This man has been abusing mutants for years, and you all chose to ignore it just because he wore a fancy suit and played into your fears. The truth is, we are different. Spider-Man is beloved and a staple of this city. The Fantastic Four are adventurers, and I can't thank them enough for the contributions they've made to this planet. But we're freedom fighters, and that makes us different. Every mutant is a part of our family, and as long as we live, we'll see to it that none of us live in fear, just because of a bad streak of luck. To those of you whose family members were taken and abused by Sinister, I can't promise that they're alive, but I can promise to anyone watching this that our mansion will be a safe haven for all mutants. You may ask me on whose authority. Sinister's militia was sanctioned by our own government. Well, I'm not him. I'm Cyclops, and we're the X-Men. In our post-credit scene, we see Glob cooking for the X-Men, finally learning that he has a family again, and he couldn't be happier. But as the X-Men feast and toast to their victory, one clone of Mr. Sinister remains, and with his last breath, he sends a signal up to Orcus, a team of scientists in space who activate Nimrod, a future threat to the X-Men.